The ancient Egyptian Abydos Passion Plays marked some of the first documented performances ever. They were performed annually for over 2,000 years at a sacred place called Abydos. In order to understand the Abydos Passion Plays, we need to understand ancient Egypt as a whole. Very little is known about the plays themselves, so the consideration and combination of other elements help fill in some of the gaps and paint a clearer picture. Let's start from the very beginning. Maybe not that early. Skip to 6000 BC, approximately the year people started to settle in what is considered today ancient Egypt. Northeastern Africa concentrated along the lower reaches of the Nile River. Over time, small villages developed into states, and 2 kingdoms emerged. But how do we even know things about a civilization that existed 8,000 years ago? We know about ancient Egypt primarily through archaeological evidence, such as monuments, tombs, excavations of their settlements, and artifacts like pottery and statues. Thousands of ancient texts and inscriptions have also given us written records. Primarily due to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, scholars are able to decipher their writing systems. Hieroglyphics, which are pictorial and used for monumental, religious, and formal inscriptions, and demonic, a simplified cursive script used for administrative, legal, and daily writing, which was developed later in ancient Egypt. Foreign accounts written by other civilizations have also given outside perspectives of ancient Egypt. We have also used environmental evidence like the Nile River itself and biological evidence like mummies, which preserved bodies. Advances in modern science allows discoveries to continue. Historians synthesize all of this evidence into coherent narratives, creating secondary sources. The academic field of Egyptology is dedicated to this work. So, essentially, what we know about ancient Egypt and therefore the Abydos Passion Plays is through interpretation. Cultural meanings are hard to replicate. In translations, something is almost always altered because languages and cultures can differ so much. It is difficult to come to definitive conclusions about ancient Egypt and the plays in all of their contexts, especially throughout ancient Egypt's 3,000-year span and 2,000-year span of the plays. Although I compiled as much evidence as possible and cross-referenced information between the sources described before, ancient Egypt and the Abydos Passion Plays will always retain an air of mystery. I cannot provide certainty, but what I can provide is an accurate interpretation utilizing a wealth of resources. With that being said, let the brief timeline that will help us understand what was happening culturally while the plays were being performed commence. Around 3100 BC, historians begin the long history of ancient Egypt, dividing it into different periods. In this period, the early dynastic period, a king, later called a pharaoh, united these 2 kingdoms with a highly centralized administration, built on the invention of hieroglyphic writing. Next comes the Old Kingdom. This is considered the first great period of Egyptian history, as well as when the Passion Plays are estimated to have started. Skipping ahead 1 period to the Middle Kingdom. Egypt is under a long succession of powerful pharaohs who bring a golden age. This was the period the Ikhernofret Stela was believed to have been written. I will discuss that in greater detail later, but essentially it was the greatest evidence we have of the Abydos Passion Plays. Then skipping a lot of periods which consist of countless political shifts, stages of unification under one pharaoh and separation under independent city-states, and later foreign invasions. Lots of ups and downs for our ancient Egyptians. The late period marks the fall of the last true pharaoh, the last time ancient Egypt was ruled by a native Egyptian. The ancient Egypt timeline ends with the Greco-Roman period, where Alexander the Great conquered Egypt and the rest of the Persian Empire, the previous foreign invaders, heralding centuries of Greek and then Roman rule. The Abydos Passion Plays are considered ritual dramas, performed annually in religious rituals. Ancient Egyptian religion grew from the natural world around them and changed over its development, creating many layered, sometimes conflicting stories without a single official doctrine. Key unifying elements were Ma'at, cosmic order, the gods, the pharaoh, and the afterlife. All of these elements happen to be central to the Abydos Passion Plays as well. The cosmos included the physical world and the gods, with Egypt as the literal and spiritual center of an ordered universe that is surrounded by disorder. The mythic timeline had 7 stages: chaos before creation, the creator deity's emergence, creation of the world and separation of beings, the sun god's reign, rule by other deities, rule by human kings, and an eventual return to primeval chaos. Ma'at represents the cosmic order that must be maintained to hold the universe together. The word Netjer, often translated to God, covered gods, deified humans, supernatural beings, and monsters. Deities appeared in many forms: human, animal, mixed, or composite, which are merged beings. Their appearances were not their literal appearance, rather a physical image of their divine qualities. This is so people could interact with them. Gods affected life and the afterlife of humans. All natural life, animals, the sun, the sky, were expressions of the divine. All worship, including rituals and festivals, sustained the gods, preserving Maat. The pharaoh stood between humanity and the gods, sharing divine status. Grand monuments were built for both. Their role was to maintain the gods' favor and maintain order. Priests also played a role in this. Maintaining harmony with the gods justified their supreme power. They believed in the cycle of life to death and death to renewed life. This applied to humans and gods. The afterlife was a pleasant continuation of earthly life. Mummification and well-provisioned tombs helped the soul reach it. Daily life consisted of work and enjoyment. Most were farmers living in mud brick homes by the Nile. Annual floods made farming seasonal and sometimes sent workers to build monuments. Other jobs included scribes, priests, and doctors. Women had relatively equal rights and could hold many roles. People also swam, boated, played games, danced, and made music. Now, the plays themselves. Alan Sykes, professor and researcher at LSU, states, "The Abydos Passion Play is the name given to an event staged during the annual Koyak festival in the ancient Egyptian city of Abydos. The event commemorated the mythical death and resurrection of Osiris, god of the afterlife, and scholars of the source material claim that it exhibited many elements that we recognize today as theatrical." The fullest version of the Osiris myth is told by the Greek historian and philosopher Plutarch. His account is rather late, but it ties in well with other evidence over the period, such as hieroglyphics left at the Temple of Horus at Edfu, named the Triumph of Horus. Osiris was the first king of Egypt. The son of Geb, god of the earth, and Nut, goddess of the sky. He was a good king, and with his wife Isis, goddess of healing and magic, who was also his sister, sidebar, apparently they were in love even in the womb, taught mankind how to grow crops and harvest them. His brother Seth was god of the desert, storms and winds, a force of chaos. Seth was jealous of Osiris and plotted to kill him so that he could take the throne. There are several stories about how he did this. In one, Seth hacked his brother's body apart and buried the pieces in different parts of Egypt. Isis recovered all the pieces, wrapping them in linen. Having reassembled what she had, Isis and her sister Nephthys, also Seth's wife, then turned themselves into kites and used their wings to protect Osiris's body and waft the breath of life back into his lungs. In another story, Seth locked Osiris in a chest and drowned him by throwing it into the Nile. The chest washed ashore where a tree sprouted from it, and Isis, who was searching for her husband in the form of a kite, flew into its branches. Using magic, she was able to reanimate Osiris. In both of these stories, Osiris and Isis were together again, and soon afterwards, Isis magically conceived a child, Horus. Osiris then descended into the underworld, where he became king of that domain. The myth then continues with Horus avenging his father by killing Seth and claiming the throne as king of the living realm. The pharaoh was believed to be an incarnation of Horus while alive and Osiris after death, making these myths particularly significant. Most things in ancient Egypt lead back to their core beliefs of balance and cycles. Osiris is associated with order and Seth with chaos. Osiris went through the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The myth represented the fragile balance between opposite forces, the balance that was essential to their way of life. The Ikhernofret Stela. At Abydos every year for 2,000 years, this story was retold. Scholars have called it the Abydos Passion Play, this story acting as the plot. Our only piece of primary evidence of this truly being acted out as a drama is a stone tablet written in approximately 1850 BC, remember, during the Middle Kingdom, by Ikhernofret, a participant in the ritual that year, on which he documented the Osiris festival run by the temple priests as well as what he did within it. Ikhernofret was a high-ranking vizier, often translated to official, under Sesoret III. He erected this elegant stela near the great temple of Osiris at Abydos. He did this as a religious and social investment to secure perpetual offerings and blessings in the afterlife. Abydos itself was located 500 kilometers south of Cairo, sitting on the desert's edge. 15 kilometers west of the Nile. It emerged as a primary cult center for Osiris, and the pilgrimage to Abydos was now a very important feature of religious life. Osiris was thought to have been buried at a sacred cemetery in Abydos, now called the el-Kab, translated to Mother of Potsherds. People reached the el-Kab by the Pilgrim's Way, or the Wadi. Today, the Wadi is still the worn dirt path that it was during the Middle Kingdom, and on either side are tall ridges, somewhat like hills, that the audience would stand upon to watch. They were not allowed to step foot on the el-Kab itself, only priests performing could, or they risked being burned to death, which was considered one of the cruelest and most shameful ways to die because the Egyptians wanted their bodies for the afterlife. It is believed the priests started performing the ceremony at the Temple of Osiris. They continued performing while traveling to the el-Kab, where they finished the ceremony. The Koyak festival, just like the play, is only able to be reconstructed in a broad outline. It took place over at least 10 days, and the priests performed only certain episodes on each day. The rituals were performed specifically to ensure fertility, namely of crops, but it has also been associated with the fertility of women and cattle, as well as to infuse the community and its leaders with renewed vitality for the year ahead. The timing of the festival placed it just as the waters of the Nile receded, exposing silt-covered fields fresh for sowing. The death and revival of Osiris provides the mythic ethos of the annual rebirth of the crops. During the ceremony, small plots of earth were sown with barley, creating symbolic Osiris beds. They were cultivated over the duration of the festival to represent the god's body regenerating in the earth. The withering and regrowth of grain was seen as a metaphor for resurrection, and thus the physical and spiritual were made one. Festivals weren't simply commemorations. They were reenactments and activations of the eternal cycles that bound the gods and nature together. People came from all over to witness the grand event and had to fight for space with vendors. Usually, vendors did not try to sell things at events that were not for entertainment. The set, quote-unquote, was the sacred environment of Abydos. It was a moving drama. Locations including temple spaces, the Pilgrim's Way or the Wadi, in the el-Kab. The lighting was natural daylight when outside, and torch or firelight could have been used when inside the temple. Ikhernofret describes clothing, quote, the god in my office of Master of Secrets, end quote, which has been interpreted as providing costuming for the Osiris statue in the temple, in order to fully perform and carry out the ritual. Statues were only removed from temples and shown to the public for special religious events like this. The actors played different gods, but the main character, Osiris, was played by the statue. The drama thus proceeded as interactions among human actors, priests, statues, and, in one case, a crocodile mummy possibly playing Horus, and small props such as boats. The human actors prepared for their roles indirectly through training for priesthood, practicing essential daily rituals. Dialogue was probably much less important than it is in modern drama. It wasn't necessarily scripted, but the performances followed the same established events, with changes over the periods. Priestesses often took on the mythical roles of Isis and Nephthys, the mourning sisters of the slain god. They enacted the sacred lamentations, keening and weeping in stylized forms during the ritual of resurrection. These mourning priestesses sometimes bore titles like Singer of Isis or Mourner of Osiris. Their cries were thought to revitalize the spirit of the dead, just as Isis had wept Osiris back to life. Costuming, hair, and makeup are implied to be imitations of the god's physical forms, or traditional priestly attire worn during rituals. Most wore simple white linen garments, and shaved their heads to represent purity and maintain ritual cleanliness. Kohl was linked to Horus, and both genders applied it heavily around the eyes to reduce sun glare, prevent eye infections, and define beauty. Reliefs on the roof of the Dendra temple, just south of Abydos, illustrate scenes from the Koyak drama, portraying a priest wearing a falcon mask, indicating that he plays the god Horus. Masks are known from archaeological evidence, although the exact falcon mask depicted has not been found. Most religious ceremonies incorporated music and expressive body movement. The gods, it was believed, were summoned, soothed, or celebrated through sound. In festivals particularly involving fertility or rebirth, which this one did, priestesses might also serve as sacred dancers. Their movement would have been ritualized, rhythmic, and spiritually potent, so it can also be implied that these elements were also used in the Passion Plays. Greek historian Herodotus saw the Abydos Passion Play on a visit to Egypt in 450 BC, the later period. He records that a scene enacted Horus born as a baby, but grew to enormous size and developed a voracious appetite. This could be interpreted as a comedic element, though it still confined itself to religious themes. The various legends of ancient Egypt also provided an inspiration for Greek theater. Ikhernofret's account of the plays and what are implied about them generally meet Aristotle's elements of theater, although pretty loosely. The Passion Plays are most similar to the Western form of cycle plays, performed during the medieval era. Although they were roughly 2,000 years apart, they're both considered early forms of theater, and they were both built on religion and the cycle of life, death, and resurrection. Cyclical themes as a whole are central to both. Actors also portrayed divine characters, and they took place in front of large communal audiences, and the actors had to travel to different locations throughout the performance. The Abydos Passion Play survives only in fragments, echoes carved into stone and scattered through time. They will probably always remain elusive. We will never fully reconstruct, understand, or define them. An ancient story not confined by definition, but powered by belief, by ritual, by the human need to create and make meaning. The Abydos Passion Plays remind us that long before it had a name, storytelling holds eternal power. Its story was felt spiritually and physically. It transformed, influenced, and endured.